Well, we're still working on the logging railroad.
We are.
And we're moving on to the shop. We figured we'd get the locomotive shop done.
Might as well.
Might as well. And oddly enough, it goes right here where it says shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to sit on this sheet of plywood. That will be the subfloor, and then the rails will be attached directly to that, and they come in straight off of the railroad ties.
So what's this, a speed bump?
Unfortunately, the floor is thinner than the ties.
Oh.
This is why I bought a belt sander years ago.
Right.
Actually, specifically for leveling ties. Anyway, there you can see, you just sand down the tie a bit, and now the rail transitions smoothly from the tiles. Tiles, I mean ties.
Ties.
From the ties directly here onto the wood floor, and then I'm spiking the rails directly into the plywood, and then an actual floor will be laid over the top of all of this that will look like a concrete floor.
Oh, cool.
First, we need to get some rails.
Yeah.
So while we're waiting for rails, I figured let's build the walls.
That's a good idea.
And the technique that I wanted to use is a technique I've used before. Got the idea from Steve, who got the idea from an old modeling magazine, Model Railroader or something, back from the 50s or the 60s.
Goodness, I thought you was going to say an old mountain man. Come on.
But you build your basic wall out of balsa wood, and that's how I did these arches in underground Ironton years ago. And you build them out of balsa wood, and then you burn the stone pattern into them with a wood burning tool.
Well, that's cool.
And so I thought, well, let's do that for the walls of the engine shop. I know people are using other techniques now.
Right.
This is old school, and I figured,
Hey,
why
if it
not?
works.
I know how to do it, so let's do it that way. And since we're going old school, I figured use Grant Line windows and doors.
Right.
And those are back on the market again, so that's neat. These are half-inch scale.
Oh.
And actually, we're doing quite a bit of compression on the railroad because the railroad's only 18 inches wide. It's a shelf railroad.
Yeah.
And so in order to fit everything, we're doing a lot of compression. The next thing I did is I added these buttresses between the windows. Just, again, strips of balsa wood. And then I'm going to carry the weight of the roof on arches above the buttresses.
Well, that should look really nice.
And so I drew these pyramids on top of it, these triangles to use as a guide. And then I just sort of free-handed an arch using the triangle here. I marked the top of the arch and then just took a pencil and free-handed that in and said, there's my arch. Because it's a stone arch.
Right.
It isn't going to be perfect. A little imperfection in it just looks cool, frankly. So then I cut those out with a very, very sharp knife. And now I'm going to burn the stone, the parting lines, the mortar lines, into the brick with your wood burning tool.
Yes, I have a wood burning tool.
Speaking of old school, I think this has been on the market since the 1950s as well. And this is the same type of tool I used in underground Ironton. I'm also going to be using this very old Radio Shack soldering iron, which I've just abused to the point where it's not fit for soldering anymore. And I've taken to using it for burning wood, so the tip on it's ruined.
Oh.
Anyway, let's get started. I drew the lines in first with just a pencil, and now I'm coming back with your wood burning tool, and you can see that with that chisel point, if you wanted to do like really accurate brick or something.
Oh, that's easy with that one, yeah.
It's just so easy because you can do super clean V-shaped grooves in here. I don't happen to want super clean V-shaped grooves. I want this to feel not quite like field stone, but a pretty rough stone that a bunch of logging guys would have put together their engine shop with.
There you go.
So I'm starting over here by putting in some cleaner lines. You can see here, this is O-scale, so it's a little bit different, but this is more the look I want, a very sort of random looking mortar line and then a stone pattern burned into the surface of the wood as well. And all of that's done with the old soldering iron and the wood burning tool. For this, I used exclusively a wood burning tool, just like the one you've got, except I borrowed Steve's.
Oh, okay.
Because he bought one for doing just this kind of work, and he's built a whole bunch of buildings using this technique. So I also used the wood burning tool here to mark in the arches. Again, look how clean the cut is.
I know. I love that soldering iron. Yeah,
Burning tool,
wood burning. I
tool.
got a soldering iron on the brain here.
They're pretty much the same thing.
They are.
It's just the tip that's different, really,
Right.
when you get right down to it.
Exactly.
But again, if I wanted to do a much cleaner stone, boy, you could do that
Right.
with one of these. But you can see where I've drawn the lines in. I really want this to feel hand cut, and so a lot of this stuff I'm doing with the soldering iron, because you can see that it it does not produce a clean anything. Look at that tip. It's just completely ruined.
Is that a tip?
But for doing the kind of mortar lines that I want to do, so even on the clean ones, I'm coming back with the soldering iron and roughing those up, because I want everything here to feel pretty rough, pretty rustic. Now, you'll notice that the hot edge of the soldering iron is burning the wood,
Oh my.
the surface of the wood. I don't care, because I'm going to come back and burn the surface anyway. Again, I want this to feel like rough-hewn stone, and so I don't want that smooth surface. In fact, I'm going to come back and just run the edge of the soldering iron over the surface of the stone to raise a bunch of irregular bumps and so on.
Right.
And that's how it's going to look even more like rough-hewn stone that has been cut, but only just roughly cut. It's really difficult working down inside the arches here.
I imagine.
It's crowded.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's much simpler working at the top of the arches and on the arches themselves. And the easiest part here are the buttresses,
Oh,
because
yeah.
they're just so exposed that you can get the whole tool in there. But you can really see how this works.
Right.
There's something about balsa wood that when you really heat it up this way, it seals the surface. It almost becomes like a plastic surface.
That's weird.
And it's all bumpy, and it picks up a pattern that looks suspiciously like stone. I definitely need to get rid of the wood grain.
Yes, that does not belong in stone.
No. Wood grain stone, right out. But there's also going to be a sealing coat over this with a stone-like texture to it. But there's the finished product.
Looks a little bit like Harry Potter.
It does look like a Halloween spook alley or something, doesn't it? But that's just because the colors are all wrong. I think once the proper colors are in place, this is going to look like rough-cut granite with mortar lines. There we can see it with the Locomotive to get the scale. The wall needs to be taller than this, but the foundation's not there.
Oh.
And the color is now going to be added, and the primer coat, using acrylics and that same stuff I've been using, golden pastel ground textured acrylic primer.
Oh.
I've been using this pastel ground on other stuff. It's just kind of like a glue stuff. It's sort of like Mod Podge, but it has a grit to it, a really fine
That's
sand.
interesting.
And so when you put it on here, now I've put it on a little too thick, unfortunately, but you can see that it creates a gritty texture, a stone-like texture. And I'm going to sand this down just a little bit because I got a little carried away, I think. But not bad. And then that also provides the very first layer of color. And then I came back with my acrylics and just added acrylic over the gritty surface, and individually hand painted some of the stones so that I'd get variations between the stones, because that looks better.
It really reminds me of that oolitic limestone from the central Utah area.
Yeah, all the buildings down there are built from that oolitic limestone, and it
Right.
really does look
Yeah,
like that.
it looks like those historic buildings down there.
May go for that look in the final product.
Hey, you could do that.
Yeah, there it is, ready for mortar. All the color in place, all the texture in place, and I'm pretty happy with it. So let's put mortar on it. Now the mortar is just drywall patching compound,
Oh, interesting.
from the paint department.
Interesting.
And then you've got to really work it down into the cracks, but also I want it on the surface because it's going to help bring out that lumpy texture that was burned in there with the tool and make it look even more like stone. So really, really working it down in there and then trying to work it off the surface of the stone a little bit, but making sure that some of it stays behind and is allowed to just slightly dry on there. Of course, I'm working with my finger, because what else are you going to use?
Well, that was the first tools, right?
and once you get used to it, you can really speed up the whole process and go very, very quickly.
There you go.
It's actually really simple and kind of fun to do. It's sort of like finger painting or just playing in mud or something. But look at the result. Of course, as it dries, everything gets much, much wider, and you see a lot more of that film across the surface of the stone. And then what you want to do is knock this down just a bit, because I think it's a little too light. And I want to bring some of that color back out. And this is done the same way you do tile grout.
Oh, there you go.
Just come back with a slightly damp cloth, and then the key is don't get too carried away with it.
Yeah.
You want some of that on the surface because it really brings out the stone-like texture. Just kind of visualize what's looking good and just keep bringing small amounts of it off and work in layers, just a little bit and a little bit, until you can say, you know, that's the way I want it to look. I'm going to stop taking it off now. But I'm just using a damp paper towel here, but you can see that it starts to bring that underlying color back out. And then I'm actually going to go through with a little more acrylic paint and just lightly touch up some of those colors where I want to get a little more variegation, a little more variation in the individual stones.
Right.
Okay, on to the front and back of the shop. The other side wall is up against the backdrop, so we're not doing the other long wall, just the front and back. And here again, I've drawn that in, and then I'm fitting that to make sure everything's going to align and fit. And I've built the foundation here, because in order to get the front and back to fit right, I need to figure out just exactly how high everything's going to be, and then I need to check clearances.
Oh, yes.
Because the locomotives actually need to get through that archway, and because all of the space has been compressed, it's really critical to check alignments and make sure that a locomotive over on the side track over there isn't going to smack the corner as it goes around the corner. And more importantly, a locomotive coming out of the shop isn't going to hang up on the archway.
Right.
Of course, what I found is since I haven't done this process in several decades, doing the long wall, I got up to speed with it, if you will. And so the front and back went much smoother.
Well, there you go.
And I think they actually turned out a whole lot better, too.
I like the looks of those. Those are neat.
I wish the sidewall looked just as good, but I'm not going to redo it. No, it's fine. But I was really, really happy. And since these are the more visible walls anyway, because this is all up in the air. So now what I need to do is check clearances, and that means building the foundation as well. So I've put the foundation's also built out of wood, and then I've just temporarily taped the walls together with some blue painter's tape. But it's pretty critical here to check alignments because of the compression of the space.
Oh, no kidding.
You know, it's really narrow and everything's really tight, and so it's important to check to make sure the locomotives will actually fit through the archway and not run into the corner of the building when a locomotive's coming around the outside corner. So I don't have track in here, but I was able to, just checking where the track is going to go, check all of my clearances to make sure that nothing's going to run into the walls, whether it's on the side track or coming out of the engine shop. And that seems to be working fine.
Oh, I hope so.
Okay, on to the other long wall, and you're building that.
Oh.
It's really part of the backdrop.
It is. It's the reverse side.
Yeah, so it doesn't have any three-dimensionality to it. It's just printed just like the backdrop is.
I just went on the internet and found some similar-looking block, if you will, and printed it off on the printing machine.
Yeah, and then you did all of the other interior walls so that they all match.
Right.
You can only see this stuff through the windows, so it doesn't really need to be three-dimensional, and in fact, it looks great.
It does.
So So I was really happy with the way that looks. And then when it's down in place like this, it's even harder to see what's going on. I wanted to grab a camera angle here, but that's the actual angle that people can see it from when it's sitting in place, because it's way up in the air. And now on to the main doors.
There you go.
The big doors on the archway.
How's that going to happen?
Well, my original plan was to have them work, and given the tight clearances and the problems associated with hinges, I thought, no, I'm just going to make them static.
Okay.
But I wanted to put some strips across the front of them. They're just made out of strip styrene, evergreen strip styrene, 2 layers thick, so it's got grooves on both sides. And then I took some more evergreen plastic strips and started cutting out these reinforcements that actually hold the door together. And then, of course, it needs diagonal reinforcement as well. So I cut those out and put those in place, and then everything's held in place with plastic weld. Now I needed to form the door frame itself.
Oof.
And I was a little concerned about bending evergreen because I want to use this channel, and the first thing I wanted to do was just break. But I found that if you just keep encouraging it,
warm it up a bit.
I tried that, and mostly it was just a matter of just nurse it along, keep bending it a little, keep bending it a little. It gives a little, and eventually it'll go around the archway, and then I was able to glue it in place with cyanoacrylic. And then it's got a splice right here, so I used prototype practice and just put a little reinforcing piece on the back side, which looks exactly like what you would have seen. And there's the door frame.
Well, that's cool.
And again, this was going to hold hinges, but the hinges take up just enough space that I thought, a locomotive is going to run into them. I'm not planning to open and close them anyway. I'll just glue them in place and have them up. Anyway, there's what it will look like when it's up in the air and in place. So let's get some paint on the doors.
Right.
Now, I wanted to use a goofy technique that I've used over the years. Start with primer, of course, because I'm using a lacquer paint, and if you put lacquer directly on evergreen,
bad idea.
Bad idea. So I got a good automotive primer on there, a couple of light coats, and then a little bit heavier, so that I had a really good primer. I wanted to check and make sure the doors open and close.
Right.
Even though they won't close, I thought, I'm going to see what they look like closed, and they look really neat.
They do.
Anyway, on to color. So now I'm using the old Flow Quill Railroad colors, which are, as I say, a lacquer and would attack the plastic were it not for the primer. And I'm starting with some light coats, and then I came back after I had good color on there and I shot a coat of very, very dry paint, very little thinner with a whole lot of air, and then I added some black soot the same way. So this paint was really dry before it even hit the surface. Using that much air and that little thinner, you can see that it just goes on almost like a powder.
Oh, wow.
And if you take your finger wipe on this, it wipes right back off, which was my goal. So I took a soft cloth and I wiped it off of the surface, and you can see that it produces something that looks sort of like an oxidized
Looks
paint.
sooty.
Yeah. The soot gets down into the cracks, and where it's just color, it looks kind of sun-bleached and oxidized.
Yes.
You can do the same sort of thing with chalks, pastel chalks, but I've had bad luck with those because I get them looking exactly the way I want, and then I put a clear coat on it, and then it doesn't look right anymore.
Right.
This, once I get it wiped down and then put a clear coat over it, it looks exactly the same with the clear coat as it did when I started. So this is an oddball technique that I've used for years. Well, we'll cut it off here for this week. Next week, we're going to look at building the roof structure.
Oh, boy.
Which is going to be a lot of fun, and putting the wiring and the electrical together. And I'm going to ask you to build us a power meter.
We've got to have it all.
Yeah, so there's the power meter.
The old 2-wire system.
But we'll let you explain how you built that next week. But there it is.
There it is.
There's where we're at so far at the end of this week. It's coming right along.
Yes, it is.
Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, please pop over to the channel and do subscribe when you're over there, because it helps us out to have more subscribers, and tell your friends about it and get them to subscribe as well.
Right.
And if you're not a subscriber and you want to subscribe, you can do that with the upcoming blue button. Are we ready for it? Here it comes. Here it comes. Zoink!
There it is.
Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here next Sunday as we put the roof and wiring in place.